So tonight's Science on Screen presentation will be opened by Dr. John Paxton. I'd like to have Dr. John Paxton come on out tonight. Thank you. He is a computer science professor, a doctor of computer science, I should say. He is also the founding director of the Gianforte School of Computing, and his area of expertise is artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, well, welcome everyone. And for the title of my talk, I'm very careful to spell out artificial intelligence. As a new faculty member at Montana State back in 1990, I can remember going to a new faculty orientation, and someone else who was new was saying like, oh yeah, what is your research area? And I said, yeah, I did my PhD in AI. And then he started asking me like, which division of the College of Agriculture was I in? And little did I know that in agriculture, AI of course means artificial insemination. So. Artificial intelligence is our topic tonight. Next slide, please. Okay, so to set the stage for this, I think it's good to understand some of the technological trends that have taken place in the last quarter century and that are coming up. And so certainly, if we think about the world 25 years ago, we now have a world where we have an internet, the World Wide Web. Gone are the days where me and my siblings would sit around the dinner table and speculate or debate who the lead actress in Notorious was. You just pull out your smartphone and you look it up. And so we have, of course, computers in our pockets and also social media. So the world is a different world than 25 years ago, but I think the next 25 years are going to change it even more radically. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we've got coming up, we've got the Internet of Things. So not only computers are going to be on the internet, but anything of any value, probably including our bodies so we can monitor our health, it's all going to be connected. In addition, we're going to see personalized robots coming along. So this picture here, there's a sick child that can't make it to school, kind of right there. And so there's a little robot that goes in his place in this case. And then also, we are now in a world where lots and lots of data is being generated. So information, so like, we have network sensors, your smartphone is generating GPS data about where you go, unless you happen to turn that feature off, and on and on. And so how do we turn all of this information into knowledge that we can actually do things with and maybe improve the world? Underlying all of these trends is trying to add intelligence to the applications to do things a little bit better. All right, next slide, please. All right, so AI in popular culture. So going back to the 1700s, we have this thing called the Mechanical Turk, where basically there was an expert chess player hiding in this box, and they would challenge people to play chess and kind of talk about this automaton up here, which was controlled by the person. I think won about 90% of its games, played against Napoleon, some luminaries back in the 17 and 1800s. Interestingly, Amazon today has a service called the Mechanical Turk, and what it is like they will hire people to do very simple things. It appears automated, but it's actually people. That's why it's named after this item. In the 1800s, we have Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein, kind of in a challenge overnight with some other writers. And so this fascination with, humans creating other intelligent beings, it's certainly there. And then, more recently in the mid-1900s, we have George Orwell writing 1984, what happens if we live in a society where all of our moves are monitored and Big Brother is watching. Next slide, please. And then more recently, Star Trek: The Next Generation, that's late 80s and early 90s, features Data and Android. This is actually, Star Trek: The Next Generation, it's a benign look at the future. So often when we look at the future, it's kind of like what can go wrong. I appreciate that this series takes a very positive look about how humanity could actually be better in the future. And then more recently, I think Black Mirror is a Netflix series. It's in about its 4th season. This takes a darker look at what can go wrong with technology. There's actually an episode called Be Right Back, which is not unlike the premise of Marjorie Prime. A woman's husband has passed away, and they're able to, through computer and AI, bring the person back. and of course with some ill effects. And then right now at the movie theaters, we've got Blade Runner. So, we basically have, the Blade Runner kind of tracking down replicants, and again, maybe a slightly darker look at kind of where technology is taking us. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not a big fan of definitions. I think to define is to define away. But just to give you kind of a sense, this is from Wikipedia, we're basically kind of, think about it as intelligent behavior by machines as opposed to natural intelligence, which is exemplified by humans and animals. Next slide. All right, so for artificial intelligence, the idea of creating intelligence, of course, goes way back further than the 1950s. But really, at this point, computers were starting to become a little bit more common, the big mainframes. And so I would say 1950s is sort of the official inception of the field of artificial intelligence. And it's characterized by a lot of exuberance and over-optimism. So a lot of the early AI pioneers thought that within 10 years, all problems would be solved. And that clearly wasn't the case. One of the early things over here, this is a transcript from ELIZA. This is supposed to be a Rogerian therapist who tries to make people feel better. And so the person types in like, I'm afraid that I will fail my course. And then ELIZA says, do you enjoy being afraid that you will fail your course? It's just a parlor trick, right? They're just turning around the statement. But it turns out that, if you don't know what's going on, it seems like it's a decent dialogue. Then in the 1980s, we spent a lot of time trying to hand code knowledge into expert systems. So for example, if you were trying to say describe when do you cross the street, it's like, oh, well, when the walk light turns green. But what these expert systems were characterized by was extreme brittleness. So this is actually a picture of a walk sign from East Germany. This is called the Ampelmann. And it looks a little different than our walkers. For a human being, it's pretty obvious that that means walk. But if you don't have that hard-coded into your expert system, it wasn't smart enough to figure out what to do. And then, in the current decade, we're basically taking all of the knowledge that's out there on the web, and we're mining it to figure out the structure of natural language, to learn from images. And so this kind of area is called deep learning. So it's sort of like neural networks on steroids, where lots and lots of data gets pumped into the deep learning. And it actually, these networks can learn features as well as, underlying structures. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some achievements from AI. So, back in about 20 years ago, Deep Blue, which was put together by IBM, beat the reigning world chess champion at the time, Garry Kasparov, in a match of chess. IBM also put together Watson, where Watson beat the reigning human champions. Just within about a year, Google put together AlphaGo, which maybe is not the world champions Go player, but is certainly up there. Go turns out to be a much harder problem than chess. And then you also have efforts by Google and other companies to put together self-driving cars. And I think the Google fleet, some of their cars, they've logged more than 2 million miles of kind of driving around autonomously. Next slide, please. So how do we know if we've accomplished artificial intelligence? This is kind of a philosophical question. So back in the 1950s, Alan Turing, who's a real computer science pioneer, basically said, if you could interact maybe via, sort of a chat system where you don't actually see who you're chatting with, if you can converse with whatever the entity is for at least 5 minutes and think it's a human, it's like that passes sort of the intelligence test. And if it's obvious you're talking with a computer, then we'll say it hasn't passed the Turing test. So this is very much a behavioral test, and it's very human-centric. More recently, there's something called the Tokyo test. So this was, not surprisingly, put forward by some people in Japan, but the idea is that we'll say that the computer is intelligent if it could take a college entrance exam well enough to get into a top school in Japan, like Kyoto University. Next slide, please. All right, so what are some of the pitfalls of artificial intelligence? So one of the things we've probably all heard about is the singularity. And the idea there is at some point, maybe the computers sort of exceed human intelligence. Sort of on this graph, we see the red line being human intellect. And actually, I don't think the human intellect is changing all that much over the years. I think it's just, we have these tools that help us. But what you can certainly see is that computers are getting more and more capable. So what happens? And of course, here's the kind of robotic apocalypse where we have, Terminator-like overlords who are enslaving human beings. I actually don't think this is a very likely scenario at this point in time. I don't see computers being anywhere close to the general intelligence or capabilities of humans. Next slide, please. And so where I really see the pitfalls today, it has a lot to do with the fact that computers are becoming more autonomous. So for example, we're all familiar with Uber, came to Bozeman a little more than a year ago. And, at first it's like, what a great way for people to earn money. But notice what's on the top of this Uber. It's becoming a self-driving car. And one of the things that's already happened, and Tesla's doing this, there's other companies. So first of all, automation means that we're going to have a lot of people, having to sort of retool. So I think by many estimations, within the next 20 to 25 years, about half of the jobs that are currently out there, they're going to be automated. So this is an issue for like the stability of human society to try to figure out like how are people going to retool. But in addition, with some of these self-driving cars, there was an incident on the German Autobahn where the human was watching Harry Potter, letting the car drive, and it crashed and killed the person. Well, who's liable? Right? There's kind of some issues. And then another example would be there was someone driving one of Google's cars. They had a heart attack, and so the car drove them to the nearest hospital. And so that seems okay, but maybe better would have been to call 911. Maybe that would have been the better thing. And so how do we, socially, how do we build in the right rules to these autonomous systems? Another thing that can go wrong is that right now is that when we are writing computer programs, there can be bias. So like as we're feeding data into like deep learning networks, if the data is not representative of the underlying human population, then the algorithms will be trained to favor some groups over other groups. So there's kind of a social inequity issue going on. And then also, we live in a world where there's huge economic disparities. And certainly we've seen over the last generation, companies like Google, Microsoft, a lot of these tech companies, there has been massive wealth to be gained. And I think as people and the companies start to figure out artificial intelligence, it's going to happen again. So how do we keep this huge imbalance from occurring? Next slide, please. Okay, but there's an upside to artificial intelligence and automation as well. So one of the things that we confront as a world is an aging population. Well, maybe we can provide better medical care, better interactions for some of the elderly people. The movie tonight, I think we're going to see one way to that an elderly woman can interact with a younger version of her husband, and perhaps that's therapeutic, or perhaps we'll see something different. Also, a lot of the world doesn't have good medicine, but through robotics and telerobotics, maybe a surgeon in Boston could actually be like performing surgery on a child in Uganda. And so we open up some possibilities to do some remote medicine. And then also sending robots into hazardous environments. That's a great thing as well that can save human lives. Next slide. All right, so I want to leave you with a little bit of maybe advice. And so it's kind of like, especially, if you're a younger person, like maybe 40 or younger. So again, it's like 20 to 25 years, about half of the jobs are changing and going away. Here's how to future-proof yourself. So basically, of course, I'm a professor at the university, so education, right, is kind of the underlying theme to this. But clearly, if you want to become technically literate and continue to stay up on technological trends, technically literate people are going to be golden in the coming years. In addition, creativity. So we're going to really value artists. We're going to value like carpenters. We're going to value woodworkers, things that humans do by hand. There's going to be a demand for that in the coming years. And then also, computers are not, they're not human, right? So they don't understand human emotions. So if you kind of invest in like emotional intelligence, and you can be maybe like sort of a motivational coach, a nurse, someone who works with a team, manages, leads, all of these things are great areas that I see no danger of computers and artificial intelligence coming and taking from us. Next slide, please. So I'll leave you with just two kind of like parting thoughts, and that is, if you're interested in exploring further, this book, Humans Need Not Apply, it came out a couple years ago. It talks a lot about sort of like where artificial intelligence is, what some of the pitfalls are, also what some of the potential is. And then this is not a book about artificial intelligence, but I think it's highly relevant to tonight's movie. So Atul Gawande is a surgeon in Boston. He's a wonderful writer. And this book, Being Mortal, it talks about sort of how our medical system in the US has failed to really properly consider like sort of high quality living for people toward the end of their lives as they go from independence to needing assistance to being dependent. And kind of the book talks about like in the end, what we all want is a high quality of life. And so how do we do that? And so I think artificial intelligence also, depending upon how we put together some of these kind of systems, can actually help us at the end of the life. So with that, I'm at the end of my talk. Enjoy the show. Thank you.